Welcome back to another episode of the Pain, Performance, and Puhata podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nick Smith. I'm a licensed physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach for Jiu-Jitsu and other combat athletes. Let's paint a picture today. You're an athlete who has been training really hard. Maybe you're getting, ready for a competition, or, maybe you just decided you want to have a hard round. You're turning it up. Maybe you don't feel particularly good, but you're trying to push yourself, make some changes in the gym. Maybe you're trying something new, and you sustain an injury. Hear a pop, something happens in a scramble, your buddy gets a little bit wild, whatever it might be. This might be the first time you've experienced a serious injury, or you might be an athlete who has been waiting for this to happen again. It's a cycle that's repeated over and over again. And we get to be to this crossroads where you're not really sure how hard you can really push things. Maybe you've kind of kept things chilled out, 80% effort, not going super hard, and you haven't been able to kick it into that next gear. Maybe out of fear, or maybe just not really sure how hard to push things in case what just happened would indeed happen again. And this is something that's so incredibly common. Whenever I interact with a grappler who sustained an injury, or maybe they've just been banged up with different things, maybe they have a repeat injury, the common denominator that most athletes struggle with is not knowing how hard to push. Where do I start? How much training is okay? And this all boils down to essentially just load management. And load management, more or less, is how hard and how much can you train. This includes everything. This can include a really hard job. Maybe you're somebody who is a, law enforcement officer, firefighter. You work construction. Or you're somebody who sits at a desk all day. That plays a role. Maybe you're somebody who is a parent and, you're driving your kids around all the time, or you're picking them up to and from their activities, and you have to be active with them. That plays a role. You might have different jobs or requirements within your own house, within chores. That plays a role. Your level of daily activity. Maybe you go for a daily walk, or you're somebody that has to climb, several flights of stairs to get to your office. These are all things that take into consideration and part as load management outside of what you're actually doing in terms of exercise. And that's where your sport comes in. How much are you training jiu-jitsu? Are you strength training? Are you doing any kind of recovery movements on your own to address joint health? Those types of things. But load management is oftentimes the common reason why people get hurt. Too much, too fast. So when we get injured, the typical pattern for athletes is rest until the pain goes away and then return to activity. Or, fuck it, we ball and just show up and train through the pain anyway. Maybe you make some modifications to your amount of intensity of training, but you just go back anyway and you're just like, we'll see what happens. And there has to be this gray area, and this is where a good rehab coach is the most helpful, because most grapplers aren't equipped with the knowledge of how to manipulate their load management or the amount of training that they're doing to be able to productively improve their status in terms of being able to train and get back to it systematically without making things worse. Most of the time, most athletes aren't equipped to do that. You're not really expected to. If you've worked with me in the past, you're expected to. It's something that I teach all of my athletes to learn how to do. Now, a lot of times the issue is either where do I start, or how much, essentially how do I start on the mats? What am I allowed to do? And there's such a big continuum of what is considered training. So, after I'm done with an evaluation, I've, found the tissue source, I found the prognosis, what I think is going to help get them back to the mats. Next question is, when can I train? And oftentimes the training means right away. There is nuance to this, of course. If you've listened to this podcast, there's always nuance. And this is why I'm doing a podcast and not a 60-second reel. Somebody who is a black belt in jiu-jitsu is going to have a lot more leash from me versus a brand new white belt. The reason for that is because the skill acquisition of a black belt, they're going to kind of know what positions are safe and not safe for said injury for the most part. They know how to dial down their intensity. They know how to control people who are inferior to them in terms of skill set. So they're never going to really put themselves in danger unless there's a specific position. So knowing, hey, I got a knee problem, I'm not going to do stand up, I'm not going to, futz around with leg locks. Okay, they know how to do that. A white belt doesn't know how to avoid those things. So I'm going to be a lot more structured, give them a lot less leash, so to say, to play with. But finding that starting point is where I really come in during that evaluation process. Yes, I'm doing my testing. Yes, I'm, checking to make sure that everything is structurally sound. But all of that information collectively gives me the starting point in which I think the athlete can participate in jiu-jitsu safely. And I've created a 10-step process of returning to the mats, essentially. And each level is progressively challenged. It's systematic. And it's basically how my brain works. It's an adaptation of a return to running protocol that the University of Delaware did for ACL patients returning to running. And I've taken that similar framework and I've broken it out into 10 steps and applied it to jiu-jitsu specifically. And I found that categorizing things, giving people a clear guideline of what to follow is really helpful for somebody who's coming off of an injury, or if you're coming off of just being kind of banged up, you're not sure, hey, should I chill out here for today? What's an active recovery day look like? So you can at least see it zoomed out and see what the progressive steps are and realize, oh man, there's a lot of gray area here. I can participate in, controlled situational sparring at 50% speed because there's a nice start and stop of that particular activity. I can't hurt myself because all I'm going to do is work from bottom side control, and I know that all I need to do is retain guard, or if I get subbed, it's over and we stop. There's no scrambles, no takedowns. So there's always a level that's appropriate for you. The hard part is knowing where to start, and that's where a coach or somebody who's more experienced with their own injury is able to kind of fluctuate their intensity of their training. Now, when you go through that progression that I've created, this isn't like some, yes, it's rooted in evidence from my own athletes that I've worked with. It does have some science backing in terms of rest periods and intensities, but having that structure gives people a clear path. So if you are banged up, you're not just going into training and being like, well, we'll see what happens. Hope this works out for me. You kind of know going in what's safe, what's not, and you have boundaries, you have parameters, you have fail safes, you have absolute yeses, you have absolute no's type situations where if you do need to bail, you can protect yourself and train again the next day. Not be like, we'll see what happens. Hopefully it works out for me and I don't make things worse. When you're going through an injury process like this, I'm going to circle back to the athlete who rests until their pain is gone. And I want to touch on this particular athlete because something that is not really considered is during the time that you're off resting, your body is essentially getting weaker. If you're watching me on camera, we have a thing called load incapacity. This is essentially the framework of injuries. So my right hand is going to be capacity. Capacity is your limit for activity before you have an injury. If your load exceeds your capacity, the likelihood of injury is going to go up. If you are not prepared to do takedowns at full speed, there is a probability that you may get hurt. Now, when you are injured, this capacity line goes down lower. Because you're not working out, you're not doing jiu-jitsu, those things that you've been acquiring over time, they reduce. So even though the signal of pain is reduced and it's gone, you still haven't built up your capacity enough. And that's what rehab, strength and conditioning, that's what all of that is for, is to bring your capacity up. That's what return to sport testing is for, and why there's such a big gap between traditional physical therapy and actually getting back to jiu-jitsu. Is your capacity is significantly lower and you are drastically underprepared for the load of training. So when people go back to sparring right after they stop having pain and they don't really like test the waters and progress through things, their body doesn't have time to adapt, and it often causes a flare-up. So in my system of having these separate 10 steps, it gives people 10 steps is a lot to operate through. It starts with something as 0, where you're like, hey, you're not allowed on the mats, you can't do drills, nothing, because you're not there, you're too beat up. That's where you're going to be watching your instructionals, or you're going to go to class and watch. Now, that might be like, Nick, that's not training. It absolutely is training. Visualization, being able to observe, watch it, put yourself in the scenario, and visualize yourself doing those movements, even if you're not actively doing them, is learning. It is part of the motor development program. It will help you. You'll be shocked how much it actually helps while you're resting. So I encourage my athletes to go to class. If you got the time, make it part of your system. You can even put your stuff on. You can wear your gi. You can wear your no-gi stuff. Sit on the sides and watch. Participate. If your coaches aren't cool with that, be in the crowd, watch, participate, or watch instructionals at home if you have them pirated. So that's like level 0. Then you start progressing through the systems of like solo drilling. You have a exercise ball or a grappling dummy, offers no resistance, and you can work through things like Toriando drills, or a basic knee cut, those types of things. Then you work through drills with a partner who offer like a little bit of resistance. You can go through a sequence of different things. Then you can get into move of the day. If you've progressed through these things, hey, you're going to do the technique of the day, go through class without sparring. And then there's situational sparring. Then there's at different levels of intensity. There's flow rolling. So there's no start and stop anymore like there is with situational sparring. You can run through that at a particular speed. And then eventually you're starting to add in takedowns, and you're starting to add in full rounds, eventually to the point where you can get back to a competition style round, or whatever round you would do for a traditional class. So all of these things can be modified. You can take things back 2 levels. You can go up 1. And my system has everything that you would need to know in terms of soreness, what are the parameters, how many levels can you go up per week. That way it gives your body time to adapt to those things, and you're making the most linear positive progress as possible. But something to consider, heaven forbid you get hurt again, or you have a flare up of an injury, is really take time to consider what can you do to modify your training so that you can still participate and do as much as you can safely without getting yourself hurt. That's step 1. Second part of this that cannot be neglected, and of course I'm going to get on my high horse, you have to do the work. If something is injured, there's likely some kind of impairment that's associated with that injury. It could be an increase in inflammation that needs to be addressed. It could be a lack of mobility. It could be a lack of strength. It could be a lack of power. You need to be able to address those things while you're reducing your workload. You can't ignore it. Pain is not enough to tell you what is wrong and what needs to be worked on. I've had plenty of athletes who don't have pain and they're super weak because they never addressed the initial problem. Pain is a symptom. It's not the source of the problem. And addressing the source is what's going to give you that long-term relief where you're not going to have this repeated cycle. Can't neglect the stuff. At a certain point, not to gatekeep, not to be scary, but it does tend to catch up to people. Doing things the right way is a way to prevent them for the future, for the most part. Modify your training and address the problems. Don't just wait for them to go away, because they will not go away. Work on the things. Work on the mobility. Find out what those mobility tests are, what you need to be able to do for jiu-jitsu. Make sure the strength is there. Make sure it's equal to the other side. You're not compensating and just being like, oh, I'll play it on the opposite side. Work for those things. And then have a system. That system I'm going to drop in the show notes today. You guys have been listening, loyal listeners. These are things I give my athletes, but I think it's a great tool for you to be able to implement. And I think it's something that you could use. It's a simple document that you can follow. You can print it out. You can take a screenshot of it, whatever. If you like it, give me some feedback on it. Let me know what you think. You got questions about it, reach out to me directly. Love to be able to help you out. This has been another episode of the Pain, Performance, and Pohada podcast. Remember, pain is not something you should fear, just something you should respect. This is the way.